I'm Christine Flott. I am owner of NACL Consulting, a change and project management consulting firm. And I'm with Kiffin, McCoy, Albert, and we're talking today about how change management and learning and talent development can collaborate for high impact and long lasting transformation. Kiffin, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Kiffin McCoy Albert, owner of Kiffin and Company, a learning and talent development consultancy. With my experience in the corporate learning space, I've used change management skills just inherently, trying to understand and communicate the what, the why now of a new training initiative. But since change management is your area of expertise, how do you approach change management related to a new training initiative?
Yeah, sure. So, it's funny because sometimes it seems like training initiatives come in different forms. And I think you and I have talked about this. So there's change me training initiatives that seem a little bit more kind of check the box. And then there's training initiatives where we really want that training to be long lasting and impactful. And in that case, I think what we really want to do is we want to wrap a change management package around it. And so I think we want to be thinking about our sponsorship and thinking about how this training program fits in strategically with what we're doing at the organization overall. Talking to our sponsors about why we are doing this training, why we're doing it now, how does it fit in with the big picture of the company, and what we're trying to do with the company, the vision for what impact we want this to have, whether or not we're using success metrics. Hopefully we are, how we're gauging success, how we're engaging our people leaders to ensure that this is successful, making sure that people are actually going to be attending the training, that our people leaders are cascading down the importance of the training and what the learning outcomes should be, making sure that their people have time for the training carved out, and making sure that we're thinking about reinforcement for long-term stickiness. So do we need to be thinking about any sort of job description changes because of this training, or job aids that need to be made because of this training? So we want to be applying all of these change management concepts to the training program. So it's not just training, but it's a program that we are making so that we're thinking about it kind of holistically in the context of everything that's going on within the company, and making sure that it's kind of organic and really fits in with everything else that's going on at the company. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a big difference that you've just pointed out. So, as a learning and development professional, I want to look holistically at the program itself and why we're doing it, and the what, the why now, that kind of thing. But I'm still very focused on the training itself.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas it sounds like with what you're doing, not that I'm ignoring the other things
Mm-hmm.
in the company,
Right.
but generally we're in our lane. Whereas with change management with you is a more holistic approach, that you are definitely looking bigger picture, company wide, organization wide, of what else is going on, and that's a really interesting differentiation.
Absolutely. Can you tell me kind of when you're faced with the different kinds of training, like kind of like I mentioned, more of those sort of check box sorts of trainings versus the those trainings that you really do want those learning outcomes to be reinforced and really made part of what people are taking away and bringing into their jobs?
Yeah, the two things that come to mind for me with that, number one is how you communicate the information about the particular training. And then the second thing is how you approach the content. So I'm going to go backwards. So starting with the content, when you have that check the box mentality, it's just about getting something out there, right? The focus is having content delivered, not thinking too much about the value of the content. Whereas when you want to have real impact, you've got to have more of a learner focus when you're creating it, and thinking about things like, what do they need to know? Why would they care about it? And how would they best receive it? So method of delivery. Those are some starting questions. And a super simple example from my healthcare experience comes from a situation where they needed a course on best practices for treating a patient with chronic kidney disease, CKD, and the documentation about that patient into the electronic medical record. But many times, organizations, learning teams, whoever, they want to have an opening module that is something all about like, what is CKD? And I think about it in the sense of, okay, our audience for that course was a group of nurses and nurse practitioners. These folks are ones who have a degree where they have learned about common top diagnoses. They've already been treating patients with CKD. So the point here is that the information they need is around the best practices aligned to the organization's policies for treatment and documentation, not a history lesson or basic knowledge of the disease. They have Google or their textbooks they can go back and reference, for that if needed. And really the bottom line there is to not waste people's time with information that's not necessary. Don't give them the whole encyclopedia. We need to give them that one page of information that they need, right? So that's one big thing. But going back to the approach for communicating a high impact versus a check the box initiative, more thought needs to be put into what we said initially about sharing the what so that the learners understand what the initiative is. Because sometimes you think about, we get so wrapped up in the why that they don't, but they're like, well, but what is it we're even doing? So getting that what. Certainly the why is important. It is telling them why it is important, what is the benefit, and then the why now, explaining the rationale. And I think this comes into play, especially if the timing seems inconvenient or overwhelming. And I love what you said in a previous conversation we had, which spurred this whole conversation today, about the why now being so important, because sometimes the workforce may think that leadership is just completely ignoring the fact that XYZ is happening at the same time. But if they simply saw an acknowledgement that leadership did think about it and had reason to go ahead with the initiative anyway, then that could alleviate some of that resistance and resentment from the very beginning.
Absolutely. I think today's workforce is really under a lot of pressure from a lot of change in the organization all the time. And so
Totally.
I think it's really, really important that leaders really speak to that why now, because there's just so much going on. They really have to make the case for why it's important that we're doing this right now. And so I think that we're aligned on that.
Sure.
So, kind of going from the beginning of the sort of initiative to kind of the end of the initiative, we as change managers are always thinking about reinforcement activities and making sure that we're following up with those, like I said, kind of those do job aids need to change, do job descriptions need to change. And I have to imagine that that's on your mind as well, to make sure that those learnings are truly captured, and because it's not just like a one and done, right? So
100%.
what are those sort of reinforcement sort of activities that learning and talent development sorts of professionals think about?
Gotcha. Yeah, I wish that it was on everyone's mind, because I think it would make everything stick a little better and be more effective. But to answer your question, there's a couple of schools of thought around evaluation, and I'm not going to get into the models and the levels of Kirkpatrick and Phillips and all that, but those metrics can be very important. And the thing that I'd like to get across in this conversation is really about the fact that, kind of what you said, the training session is not the final destination. It's not a one and done, and follow-up is incredibly important. So no matter how good the training content is, if you don't have that follow-up, the likelihood for the knowledge or skill retention, and certainly for behavior change, is really low. So part of the strategy for any training initiative should be to have a plan for post-training evaluation and course correction. And one of the pieces of the plan that can really do this so well is coaching. Coaching can help solidify that knowledge transfer and upskilling in order to see the improved performance. And by the way, if those who are doing the coaching communicate back to the learning team with feedback for improving the training, can you imagine the continuous improvement process that we have going on just organically? Like that's huge. Those coaches, they're out there working with folks one-on-one, see that, hey, in the training, this really wasn't covered or something can come back to us, or maybe they're seeing a place that they're just not getting it. Man, that can make a huge difference.
We as change management professionals use the concept of coaching a lot as well. So that sort of kind of one-on-one or one to a few sort of opportunities where we can kind of guide people through a particular challenge that they're thinking about, or a knowledge gap that we see and need to take them to. So that's something that we use in our profession all the time as well. So
Yeah, that's awesome. Lots of similarities we find
Yes.
the more that we talk.
Yeah.
Well, during our conversations, we've also talked about that interwoven nature of change management, along with not only learning and talent development, but also internal communications. What do you see as the big differences? So we just talked about a little bit of a differentiator and a little bit of a similarity,
Mhm.
but with the three pieces, change management, internal communications, and learning and talent development, what do you see as the big differences between those three functions?
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of people think change management, they think communications and just getting the word out about the change. And there's really so much more to it. But communications is a big part of change management. Um, so there is a big, heavy part of communications about at least getting out the word about the change that is coming. So it is a type of internal communications that that we do, but it's usually centered around a particular change or project that's going on within an organization. So it could be a training, it could be technology implementation, a reorganization, some sort of project, or it could be about a new, it could be external too. So we do change management for in external clients as well.
Oh,
So
sure,
it's
sure.
usually tasked towards a particular change or project that's happening. So it's a specific type of internal communication often, or sometimes external communication. So we create those plans kind of driven towards a particular change. So I think of internal communications as those other types of communications that are just day-to-day sorts of communications that need to go out for
Sure.
other departments, sort of like IT sort of announcements that are going out about
Mhm.
security things, or you know updates are coming out, or be sure to reboot your computer every X amount of days, or HR, hey, benefits enrollment is coming up, or that sort of thing. So those are other types of internal communications that are not necessarily change management. And so I would say the comms that come out for learning and talent development are going to be, again, specific for that particular training needs. So
Right.
a little nuanced, but all specifically tailored for the particular need of the program, or that internal communication or that training need that's coming up.
Yeah. With learning and talent communications, often the audience is not enterprise wide, right? It might be that it's a particular department or a particular role, something like that. And then obviously with what you just said with change management, sometimes it's very project specific. So again, it might be a segment, but there are times when, like with a reorganization, for example, you mentioned that one, that's going to be, I would think, org-wide communication. But something that just triggered with what you were saying is, it seems like, and please correct me if this is not how you look at it, but with with change management, looking at it more holistically and kind of getting all of those parts and pieces, it's almost like in a maybe an ideal world, you all would be determining the plan, what needs to be said, like all of the, kind of all of the bulleted list of things that need to be covered. But then ideally, perhaps you could give that off, like you've got the content, so you give that to internal comms, and then they write it in a way that is aligned with the tone and the messaging that the organization has established. Is that a true statement?
I've done it both ways. So I have worked in situations where I have I've worked in a really large organization and um, worked out my communications plan with them, and kind of figured out who my different stakeholders are and how they communicate. And maybe I've come up with communication and vetted it with them or handed it off to them so that they could create the communications, and then they've bounced it back with me as the subject matter expert so that I can make sure that the information is correct.
Yeah.
And then I've worked in a smaller organization where I didn't necessarily have an internal comms team, where I knew the culture of that organization well enough that I could create the comms and then send them out and
Okay.
and have it go that way. So it just depends on the situation, what resources you have available to you, and how well you know the culture. So in some situations, I might go into an organization where I don't know the culture and develop the comms, but then bounce it off of one or two people at the organization to
Sure.
make sure that that the language sounds okay, and they may make some corrections. Or in other cases, there may be some compliance things to be concerned with, and it may need to go through some compliance review ahead of time. So it really just depends on the organization, and definitely you want to make sure that the tone is correct for the organization and the receivers.
Makes sense. Yeah. Totally get
Yeah,
that. I've had similar even with the learning and development stuff that
right.
where especially with learning and development, it's more of a I would likely be the one writing the comms for the particular trainings that we're doing, the program itself, but maybe internal comms is going to be doing organization wide about the actual software implementation or
Right.
program that we're putting in. So yeah,
Hmm.
I can see that for sure.
Yeah.
Well, so bringing us back to our kind of bottom line topic for today, how can learning and talent development and change management collaborate to maximize impact and bring about the transformation that we know and love?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's all about collaboration. And when you get, a couple of professionals that really know what they're doing in their specific areas, it really allows each professional to focus on their area of expertise. So I think it's a really great situation when you have like a high impact training that needs to happen, where you have the learning and development professional really focusing on content development, and that's their area of expertise, and follow up and tracking for ability and reinforcement. And then someone like me as a change manager can really be thinking about how to bring awareness to the program and contextualize it for the organization in terms of, like we've been talking about, the why and the why not, contextualizing it in terms of the strategy for the department or the organization, creating buy-in from the associates that are going to be going through the training, and then also partnering with that learning and development professional to be thinking about those reinforcement pieces to make sure that that's sticky down the road. Is there going to be another, part two down the road? As I've mentioned before, are there job descriptions that need to be changed or job aids, or what are those sorts of metrics that we're following up on, what systems do they come from. So I think, like I said, it really allows us to be super focused on our areas of expertise and really create a program that can be very high impact and deliver a lot of value to an organization. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I think you kind of summarized it there, that it just shows how impactful having both change management and learning and talent development working together. And I'll go ahead and throw back in the internal comms, if that's a thing that that a particular organization has in place, and that's the culture of how it works. That could be a trifecta of awesomeness.
Mhm. Exactly. Yes.
Well, this has been such a great conversation, and hopefully, anyone watching will be able to more easily distinguish between our roles, but understand how they can collaborate for the impact that we want to provide. So, thank you for getting this together.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I'm super glad that we had this opportunity. And I hope that we can and look forward to collaborating on other projects in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks, Christine.